no doubt at all, Gaza is sort of the centre of all conversations today. Question we're asking specifically today, ahead of these votes in the House of Commons on SNP motions and other motions, is about what Prince William had to say yesterday. He issued a statement where, said, I think, what most people would probably agree with, which is that he would like a peace in Gaza. He wants an end to the fighting. He professes profound concern and said that too many have been killed in the conflict. He urged more humanitarian aid and the release of the hostages held by Hamas, and he called for an end to the fighting as soon as possible. Even in the darkest hour, he said, invoking Sir Winston Churchill, we must not succumb to the counsel of despair. I continue to cling to the hope that a brighter future can be found, and I refuse to give up on that. His words were checked with number 10 first, obviously straying, many would say, into political territory. Some eyebrows have been raised, though, at him doing this. We know that a lot of criticism of Prince Charles when he was the heir to the throne in terms of his walking into what are architecture and talking to plants, maybe not, but otherwise very political issues. So I'm asking you today about the criticism of Prince William. He's facing criticism for calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza. What's your reaction? Was what he was saying blatantly obvious and reasonable, or was it moving into political territory? Should he have said it? Should he have not? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text on 87222, or get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. Benedict, I mean, where do you stand on this? Because a lot of the callers have been having in the text are saying, look, he's entitled to give his views as anyone else, but also, what is there to disagree with in what he had to say?
Well, it is straying into political territory because it is, whether you like it or not, it's a criticism of Israeli military policy. Israel is a very important military and, in other ways, ally of the United Kingdom and of the United States.
It's the only democracy in the Middle East. They are our allies.
It is our biggest ally in the Middle East, apart from Saudi Arabia. And, I think that...
Who I wish weren't an ally.
Well, I think that shows you the kind of the dichotomy and the difficulty that you have in dealing with the Middle East. It's very difficult to actually, and Sir Keir Starmer is finding this as well. It's all very well when you aren't the person picking up the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu and having to explain why you've just sort of called him out. But as I say, it's only happening now because the Israelis are pursuing a military strategy that clearly the prince disagrees with. You can't do that, actually, because
you're
setting the precedent that you might want to wade into all kinds of conflict, that anybody applies pressure to you, and that is ultimately what this is about. Left-wing politicians in this country feel acute pressure from certain demographics, certain communities to do something, to be seen to be doing something.
They're not doing something, they're saying something.
Well, that's what I mean. But,
put a Palestinian flag in your bio, and there you are, you're a good person.
Well, many voters would happily have the British government sanction the Israelis. Actually, that is what people would like. But at the very least, they expect them to say something. And what I think is more interesting is, broadly, is this a move where, as the body politic in this country fragments and the royal family is looking for a role in society, will it begin to stray more into political territory? Because it thinks that's rather popular right now amongst this segment.
And
I'm supposed to represent everybody, and this is a minority, and I have to stand up for minorities.
But also, again, it seems very easy, doesn't it? I mean, again, I've been saying it's kumbaya territory. And saying, I don't want innocent children to die. Of course no one wants innocent children to die, apart from Hamas. That's literally what they want. That is their policy. They did that. They did the attack on October the 7th on Israeli territory, taking those hostages, was absolutely thought through. They knew what Israel would do in response. They knew it. It's not a surprise what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, we can disagree with certain aspects of the tactics. I've certainly got concerns now. I don't think it's realistic to expect Israel to have a right to self-defence, but not, unfortunately, see the deaths of civilians, including children in Gaza. It's terrible. It's awful. War is horrible. Yes, it is. And it always has been, and it always will be. But asking people to evacuate from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza, to evacuate to Rafah, and then to bomb refugee camps, I'm sorry, I think a lot of people who are... I mean, I'm as staunch on Israel's side as you could possibly be as the innocent party in this, in my view, compared with Hamas. But this is going too far. A lot of people do have concerns. But that is a political point.
Yeah, it is.
And Prince William is supposed to be outside of politics. What about people saying, look, but he's got a right to say anything he wants?
But again, though, actually, the assault on Rafah has been coming for weeks and weeks, just like the initial Israeli incursion into Gaza was delayed by weeks and weeks, specifically so that people can move around, so that they can move back up north. Now, I understand that there's not as much infrastructure as there used to be because the Israelis have just bulldozed their way through it, but they're doing what most armies in the world would not do, and that is actually trying to get into a situation where they minimise civilian civilian casualties because they know they are held to a higher standard. The Russians don't do this. Right now, they're happy to just blitz everything that moves. If there were to be a war in Taiwan, it would be a part of China's strategy to try and demoralize the defense of the island by hitting civilian infrastructure. I don't know why people think that the Israelis alone are particularly evil. Oh, wait, I do know. It's because they're the Israelis. That's why they're held to a different standard.
And exactly, and this is what's interesting about Prince William speaking out on this. Let's also talk about the events happening in the House of Commons this afternoon. So at 12 o'clock, we're going to have PMQs. Keir Starmer are asking questions of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. After that, but sometime a bit later, around between 4 and 7, we expect to have some votes on this opposition day motion, which has been tabled by the SNP. They obviously are a smaller party. They don't get as many opposition day debates, but they have tabled a motion, which many are saying is more about politics in the UK, politicking, than actually trying to save lives of innocent children in Gaza. But they have tabled a motion, and it's a fairly lengthy motion, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Remember these phrases, immediate ceasefire, condemning the collective punishment of Palestinians. Labour have tabled an amendment after long conversations behind the closed doors, where they say that the planned assault on Rafah, quote, must not take place. So they're taking political side on that. But also demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. So adding that word humanitarian in, that must be observed by all sides. Only two sides, is Israel and Hamas. The Tories have also proposed an amendment urging an immediate humanitarian pause. So we've got these three slightly different phrases. They're backing Israel's right to self-defence. Now, crucially, it's up to the Commons Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, in a meeting in that we may well find out what the decision is as soon as the MPs do, where that SNP motion will be voted on later. The question is whether or not the Conservative amendment will be voted on beforehand or after, and indeed whether the Labour amendment gets voted on at all if there's already a Conservative amendment. This is because of the niceties of Commons procedure. Crucial thing here is that Labour have been in a bind. Keir Starmer's being accused of basically a U-turn, having not called for a ceasefire before. But last November, a previous SNP motion on the conflict saw 56 Labour MPs rebel, 10 resignations from the front bench. No one anyone had heard of, to be fair. But we're not talking about David Lammy on the foreign secretary resigning. So Labour are trying to head off a rebellion by Labour backbenchers and indeed front benchers. And they want to have their own motion. If they don't get their motion voted on, then what do their MPs do? But again, this is all just semantics and a talking shop in the UK. Does it have any bearing whatsoever on what happens in the Middle East?
I mean, that's the key thing. It has almost no bearing whatsoever. But it's very clever politics by the SNP and also actually by the Conservatives to a point, because I suspect their wording is probably what Keir Starmer would prefer, given that he is likely going to be the one that in a couple of months' time is picking up the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu and needs good relations with him.
And no one thinks this conflict will be over by then.
A humanitarian pause and Israel has the right to defend itself is actually the sort of line that you want to take with your closest ally in the region. The SNP one is designed entirely to split Labour MPs because they recognise that actually a lot of Labour voters in certain constituencies want what the SNP are calling for. In fact, they want them to go further, but that's what they'd take. And if they don't vote for that, the questions will be, well, you don't take this seriously. You are facilitating genocide. That's what they say. Yeah. It's nothing to do with collective punishment. They go much further than they say genocide. So the Labour Party are in a really tricky situation where the SNP's motion is far more appealing to a lot of their MPs. To the leadership, the Labour leadership, actually the Tory line is the one they want to take. So they've come to this halfway house that doesn't really suit anybody, and inevitably they're going to end up having to punish people who will vote with the SNP. But the SNP want that because a powerful Labour Party is the big threat to the SNP in Scotland. So they want to absolutely exploit these divides. And you suspect that a lot of Labour MPs are either, they're too principled or too stupid to see that they are going to fall exactly into the SNP's hands by voting with them.
Indeed, but again, they're playing politics over something that's actually about the life and death of innocent people, including children in Gaza, is quite something, isn't it? And a lot of this is looking ahead to the local elections, which are coming up on the 2nd of May. And that's going to be well, apart from Rochdale by-election, goodness knows how many other by-elections we're going to have with Tory MPs falling by the wayside, with various things they've been getting up to or not getting up to in recent years. But local elections is a very big test. And Labour are getting very, very worried. They've got a lot of other candidates going to be standing against them, a lot of division within their ranks, and particularly in a lot of seats with large Muslim populations, where you've got the party being controlled a lot by the far left as well. And again, people say, it's a different Labour Party. It's very different under Keir Starmer. The leadership may be different, But a
Oh,
lot of the
still.
membership isn't. And bearing in mind, there is no evidence at any point that Keir Starmer ever, in public or private, stood up against the anti-Semitism in the party before he became
Yeah,
party
and
leader.
not a lot of voters are actually switching from the Conservatives to the Labour Party. It's simply that Tory voters aren't coming out. But if there is dissatisfaction...
Or they're going to Reform UK.
If there's dissatisfaction among Labour voters at local elections and at the by-elections, actually the SNP can then turn round to their own constituents and say, well, look, it's not quite as done a deal as you think.
Yeah.
They might not be in power for very long. You want to stick with us because we are the only way you can guarantee getting that particular brand of left-wing/nationalist politics north of the border. They're not actually a very sure party. They don't know where they stand on this issue. They've U-turned on other things. So you can see why actually the Labour Party, it's in a more difficult situation than everybody thinks. When it's a simple question of them and the Tories, well, it's a slam dunk. But actually, when it comes to other parts of the country, SNP, Scotland, that's less easy, I think, for them to win over.
Yeah, OK, very interesting.